Every hero in Overwatch has their strengths and weaknesses, and as an asymmetrical class-based shooter, perfect balance is, by definition, impossible. With that said though, what improvements could be made to the overall balance of the game, and what could be done to improve how much people enjoy playing the heroes they main? I'm the astrobiologist, and after over 4 years of playing this game and observing trends in what balance changes work and which don't, I believe I have come to a set of changes for every hero that will make the game as a whole the best it can be. Also, before we begin, I try my best to make videos you guys will find interesting, and I really want to not be forced by the YouTube algorithm to scream into an empty void until the end of time. So, if you enjoy the stuff I make, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and all that jazz to save me from such a fate and allow me to spread my message further throughout the Overwatch community. Thank you. Today, the heroes we'll be looking over are Sigma, Winston, Wrecking Ball, and Zarya, so without further ado, let us begin. Assessment of Sigma. Sigma is a unique hybrid of both an off-tank and a main tank, with half of his kit being defensive while the other is offensive. In theory, this should make him a very flexible hero, but unfortunately his piled-on nerfs have exacerbated his natural weaknesses to the point where he must be essentially babysat to function properly. The biggest issue specifically is that Sigma can be rushed down and deleted so easily. Without being babysat, especially by a certain robotic centaur, Sigma's defenses fall apart quite quickly due to the fact that his primary tanking tool, Kinetic Grasp, does not protect him from melee or beam weapons, and his barrier is rather flimsy for its size and cannot be repositioned often enough to allow him to retreat from danger. On the offensive side, the issue actually comes down to the fact that his primary method of defending himself from being rushed, Accretion, no longer has the damage to punish and kill when landed perfectly in combination with his primary fire. And finally, there's the issue of his ultimate, Gravitic Flux. While not a terrible ultimate, it is often too risky to use due to how long its cast is and how long its duration is, especially since any stun will now cancel the ultimate altogether, even after it has been cast. So, in essence, Sigma's issues come down to the fact that he's actually too squishy and unable to defend himself to really function properly as a main tank or really even an off-tank. But here's my solution. Hyperspheres. Can no longer self-damage. No, will still inflict gravitation upon Sigma. Can now be used while deploying Experimental Barrier. Experimental Barrier. Maximum barrier health increased from 900 to 1000. Recharge rate decreased from 120 per second to 100 per second. Cooldown removed. Kinetic Grasp. Canceling the ability early with another action will now still grant shields. Note, enemy stuns will still negate shield gain. Percentage of damage converted into personal shields reduced from 60% to 50%. While Experimental Barrier is deactivated, now recharges Experimental Barrier equal to 50% of damage absorbed. Accretion. Cooldown increased from 10 seconds to 12. Direct impact damage increased from 70 to 90. Maximum stun duration decreased from 3 seconds to 2.5 seconds. Can no longer self-damage. Knockdown duration now scales with airtime instead of horizontal distance. Gravitic Flux. Stunning Sigma after targets have been lifted into the air no longer cancels the ultimate. Note, killing Sigma will though. Ult charge requirement increased from 1960 to 2142. With these changes, my idea was to increase Sigma's ability to protect himself while also decreasing the frequency of his CC and making his barrier stronger but a more management-heavy ability. I also made quality of life changes and some changes just to help the hero flow better, like removing the self-damage from his primary fire, allowing him to still gain shields when animation canceling out a grasp, and allowing him to use his primary fire while deploying his barrier. Regarding what I said earlier about reducing the frequency of his CC, I increased the cost of Gravitic Flux, but also made it more consistent by making stuns unable to cancel it after Sigma has already selected the target area. I also increased the cooldown of the primary CC ability, Accretion, making it less frequent, but increased the damage upon a direct impact so that Sigma is better able to defend himself against lone aggressive flankers and squishies. I'd also like to emphasize lone squishies, because any healing whatsoever while Sigma performs his kill combo will still result in the 200 health target surviving. As a side note, I'd mentioned that I'm very much against the changes to Accretion currently on the experimental card, as it reinforces CC spam while also removing a fun and unique mechanic in the form of the stun duration scaling with the distance. As for what I mentioned earlier about strengthening his barrier while also making it more management heavy, I thought the best way to do this would be to make it more reliable while it's activated, but also more challenging and interactive to keep at full health while it's deactivated. The increased maximum health and cooldown removal help in the reliability department, but I also decreased the rate at which the barrier recharges passively while adding a new level of interactivity in the form of the other 50% of the damage Sigma absorbs with Kinetic Grasp going towards recharging his barrier in a burst. After all, I always thought that Sigma especially having a ability that violates the law of conservation of energy rather unfitting. Assessment of Winston. Winston is a high-mobility main tank that specializes in locking down areas for brief periods of time in which targets can be singled out and targeted by Winston and his team. He's also very notable in that his primary fire is the only non-melee weapon capable of completely bypassing barriers, and is also capable of damaging any targets within a broad cone in front of him simultaneously. This means Winston is also excellent at scattering and breaking up enemy teams. His damage output may be relatively low, but the damage he does output usually has quite the impact. However, Winston's damage is inherently bad against armor, and while that's an important weakness for the hero to have, he still could at least use better pressure over time to armor. Anyways, my Winston changes. Primary fire. Ammo capacity increased from 100 to 140. Reload time increased from 1.7 seconds to 2 seconds. Jump pack. Winston is immune to knockback effects while in the air for 1 second after ability is cast. Primal Rage. Damaging Winston now gives 15% less ult charge while in Primal Rage. As you may have noticed, these changes are minor in number, but honestly would help the hero be at least not terrible against enemy team compositions that aren't favorable for him. The changes to his primary fire aren't going to change how much damage he can do per second, but over time it should mean that he has the ability to pressure armor a little bit better. The change to his jump is also pretty simple, but though it'll still leave the vulnerability to being knocked off course while diving intact, it'll mean that the window to do so is a bit smaller overall. Consistency is important for a hero like Winston, and this change will do just that. The last change, though, is largely just a quality of life change, as using Primal Rage always brings the concern of feeding enormous amounts of ult charge to the enemy, and though a 15% reduction won't remove that concern, it will at least lessen it. Assessment of Wrecking Ball. Ball is a unique style of tank who does his job through disruption and displacement of the enemy team by literally just booping them around everywhere. He can achieve this effect almost constantly due to the fact that he is almost certainly the most mobile hero in the game, capable of traversing entire maps in only a matter of seconds. He also benefits from the fact that combined with his large health pool, he usually has no head hitbox, making him impossible to land critical hits on. This is only further compounded by the fact that he has an ability that allows him to generate up to 700 personal shields for himself. All in all, Ball is a pretty solid hero. But the only issue with him really is that while it's true that CC is supposed to counter him, it sometimes results in hard countering Ball. Hard counters are really not all that helpful for the game, so here's my solution. Quad cannons. Maximum spread reduced from 2 degrees to 1.7 degrees. Reload time increased from 1 second to 1.2 seconds. Grappling Claw. Can now grapple to floors. Getting stunned at fireball speed now reverts back to normal rolling speed instead of completely stopping Wrecking Ball. No, knockdowns, sleeps, pulls, and freezes still completely stop Wrecking Ball in his tracks. Adaptive Shields. Can now be activated during pile driver animation. Cast time reduced from 0.2 seconds to 0.15. So, starting from the top, we have the changes to Ball's primary fire. Now, this isn't too major of a change, but it should allow him to put the fact that these cannons are hit scan to better use. It of course won't make using them better than rolling around, but it should make heroes like Pharah and Echo a little less painful to deal with. As for the changes to Ball's Grappling Claw, at first these sound ridiculously overpowered, but upon further inspection I believe you'll find them not to be as bad as they sound. See, the only abilities that apply only stun and nothing else are Flashbang and Shield Bash. But I simply wanted to give Ball just a few less things to worry about. This way, the CC that is applied to him is still an effective way of countering him, but certain abilities still allow him to retain some of his momentum if he is hit while in Fireball mode. The ability to grapple to floors is honestly intended just to make the hero a bit more intuitive, and reduce some of his most frustrating moments, like when you're trying to grapple to the top of a pillar, but you hit the upper surface of it, and therefore the tether doesn't connect because it's technically considered a floor. Finally, the changes to Ball's shields are more quality of life than anything, as there really isn't any reason to not allow them to activate the shields while using Pile Driver, and the same goes for the cast time in general. So these changes should just help make this very fluid hero feel all the more fluid. Assessment of Zarya. Zarya is an off-tank that specializes in absorbing incoming damage and then throwing it back with twice the punch at the enemy using her beam and projectiles. She is often best used for protecting teammates as they try to escape, body blocking damage, and enabling her teammates to make risky plays. She is overall pretty balanced, but if the enemy has too much damage or range, Zarya will struggle due to her lack of mobility. So, in short, she just needs to be a bit more consistent. That's the long and short of it, so here are my minor changes to her. Secondary fire. Blast radius increased from 2 meters to 3 meters. Damage decreased from 9.4 up to 4.7 to 9 up to 45, with a steeper fall-off. Self-damage decreased from 4.7 up to 23.5 to 2.5 up to 11.5. Particle barrier. Now immediately cleanses any non-gravity related negative status effects. Projected barrier. Now immediately cleanses any non-gravity related status effects. Graviton surge. Radius increased from 6 meters to 8 meters. So, first of all, the changes to her secondary fire are just to help with that consistency aspect, as with a larger blast radius, she's able to cover more area and build ult charge more reliably. It also helps minorly with the whole tanks do too much damage issue, although I'll admit I don't personally buy into that argument all too much. On to the more significant changes though. The changes to her bubbles mean that even effects of things like sleep, hack, and freeze will be immediately cleansed from any ally the bubble was used on. And it also means that activating the bubble on herself and allies can negate the rooting effects of things like Junk's trap. Finally, the biggest consistency buff here is the increase to Grav's radius, meaning that there shouldn't be as much of an issue with seemingly nearby enemies not getting pulled into it. This is especially a problem at lower ranks, where enemies don't tend to be as coordinated and grouped up. So, those are my changes for Sigma, Winston, Wrecking Ball, and Zarya. Let me know what you think of them in the comments below, and share this video around if you really like my ideas. This is also the end of the tank heroes, so next time we'll be starting with the DPS category, and we'll be covering my changes for Ashe, Doomfist, Echo, and Genji. Before you ask, yes, of course I didn't forget Bastion, but he and any other heroes I've given major reworks will be getting their own episode as the finale for the series, so sit tight. Anyways, that's all for now. Godspeed to you all, and I'll see you all in the next one. Bye bye.